By the end of this story, you'll understand exactly why a billionaire on his deathbed gave everything to his maid. Not his children, not his lawyers, not his ex-wife, his maid. The woman who cleaned his toilets, folded his socks, and ate tuna salad in the laundry room. But first, before the world turned upside down, before the will was opened and the mansion turned into a war zone, you need to know what happened inside the bathroom that night. Because what happened in that small white room didn't just change two lives. It started a storm that would tear through a fortune, rip a family apart, and dig up secrets buried for over 40 years. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story with me, smash that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because, trust me, tomorrow I'm bringing you another story that's going to hit just as hard as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. It was the kind of storm that made windows shake and trees bend like they were praying. The Winkler mansion, normally glowing with lights and laughter, was dead quiet. No power, no servants, just one flickering candle behind the bathroom door. Inside, Helen Bainey stood frozen. Black uniform, wet shoes, the same bathroom she had cleaned more than 4,000 times. And yes, she kept count in a little notebook from the 5 and dime. She didn't expect this night to be any different. But then she felt his hands. "They're downstairs," Dennis Winkler whispered, his voice low and tired. "Fighting over my money. And I'm not even dead yet." He was pale, shaking, his silk bathrobe hanging off his skinny frame like laundry on a broken line. Helen didn't speak. She never did when there was nothing helpful to say. That was her superpower, quiet loyalty. While the billionaire's children screamed about Wi-Fi and stumbled around for flashlights, Helen had already found the emergency candles. Same drawer, same shelf, same spot since 1972. The house smelled like lemon polish and old medicine. The clock ticked in the hallway like it was holding its breath. Dennis looked her in the eye. "You're the only one who never asked me for anything," he said. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. Wax sealed. Heavy. Important. "If they find this before you do," he said, placing it in her hands, "they'll bury me before my heart stops beating." Helen felt her knees weaken. Not from fear, from trust. Imagine someone handing you the one thing that could burn down everything they built. That's what it felt like. Then Dennis looked at her, eyes glowing in the candlelight like a man trying to speak before it's too late. "There's something I did," he said. "In 1979, the clock chimed 10 times. And just like that, our story begins. Not in this marble mansion, not under a crystal chandelier, but in a small wooden office by the docks, where two young men once dreamed of ships, success, and building an empire. Only one of them would keep it. The other would lose everything. And the maid? She would become the keeper of a secret so powerful. It would flip an entire dynasty upside down. Every morning for 20 years, Helen arrived at 5:47 a.m. Not 5:45, not 6 o'clock, but 5:47, because that's when the number 9 bus dropped her at the bottom of Leopard Hill, and she had exactly 13 minutes to walk up before Mr. Winkler wanted his coffee. The bus driver, Sal, knew her so well he'd honk twice if she wasn't at the stop, which happened maybe 3 times in all those years. She still used tokens to pay, kept them in a little coin purse her mother had sewn from an old skirt. The transit company stopped making those tokens in 2012, but Helen had bought a whole roll of them before they disappeared, just like she did with postage stamps when the price was about to go up. You know how some people are just part of the furniture? Not ignored exactly, but just there? That was Helen's superpower. She moved through the big Winkler house like a shadow that cleaned things. The family talked in front of her like she was deaf or wasn't even in the room. That's how she knew so many secrets. The kitchen was Helen's first stop every morning. She'd get the Folgers going in the old percolator. Not one of those fancy drip machines, but the kind that burbled and sent the smell of morning floating up all 3 floors. Mr. Winkler wouldn't drink coffee from anything else. Said the new ways made it taste like dishwater. Her uniform hung crisp as cardboard in the small closet off the kitchen. 5 sets, all the same, black dress, white apron, sensible shoes she took to the cobbler over on 5th Street whenever the soles were thin. Some of those shoes were older than the Winkler grandchildren, just resold so many times you couldn't tell. By 6:15, Helen would have Mr. Winkler's coffee on his desk in his study, along with the Wall Street Journal and 1 piece of toast with orange marmalade, the kind with big chunks of rind that came in a ceramic jar. Some mornings he'd nod at her. Most mornings he didn't look up from his paper at all. Remember when $2,100 a month seemed like good money? Helen made it stretch like taffy at the county fair. Her rent took half, her mother's care took most of the rest. Lunch was whatever fit in an old margarine container, tuna salad or egg salad or sometimes just crackers and peanut butter. Helen always ate in the laundry room at exactly 12:30. Sitting on an overturned milk crate while the dryers hummed. Today she pulled out her mother's last letter from the pocket of her apron. The paper was worn at the folds, like an old map that's been opened too many times. My dearest Helen, it began in shaky handwriting. The doctors say another treatment might help, but don't you dare spend your savings on me. I've had a good life. Tucked behind the letter were the bills. $47,000 and climbing. Numbers that made Helen's stomach feel like it was full of cold stones. The hospice was nice, with real flowers in the hallways and nurses who knew her mother's name without looking at the chart. But nice things cost nice money. As Helen refolded the letter, she heard the front door slam. That would be Clive, Mr. Winkler's oldest son, who only visited when his bank account was empty. He had his father's height but none of his backbone. Always wearing suits that cost more than Helen made in 3 months. Where's Dad? Clive's voice boomed through the hallway. Helen slipped the letter back into her pocket and headed upstairs with the laundry basket. On the 2nd floor, she passed Diana's room, where shopping bags from places like Saks and Neiman Marcus were stacked like Christmas presents. Twice a month, Diana would tell Helen to donate these old things, meaning sell them at the consignment shop and keep the money. It was Diana's way of helping without saying she was helping. At the end of the hall was Marcus's room, door always closed, smelling of whatever cologne was most expensive that year. He'd stumble in at dawn some days, reeking of casino cigarettes, and Helen would leave aspirin and water by his bed without being asked. Through the big windows on the landing, Helen could see into the garden next door where Lila, Mr. Winkler's ex-wife, sat under a white umbrella. Even at that distance, Helen could see the glint of opera glasses. Lila watching the house she used to live in, keeping tabs on the family she used to have. The Winkler fortune came from shipping, not the Amazon kind, but real ships with real sailors. Dennis built it from one rusty freighter he bought at auction in 1962. You could do that then, buy a whole ship for what a car costs now. Later that afternoon, while Mr. Winkler was napping, Helen found something strange in his bathroom. Behind the tube of Brill cream in his medicine cabinet were pills she'd never seen before, white, unmarked, hidden in a plain bottle with no pharmacy label. She'd seen pills like that before, at her mother's hospice, when the pain got too bad and the doctors talked in low voices about making comfortable. But Mr. Winkler wasn't in hospice. He wasn't even sick, at least not that anyone had told her. As Helen closed the cabinet, she caught her reflection in the mirror. The same plain face that had looked back at her for 58 years. But today her eyes held something new: worry, maybe fear. She didn't know it then, but in the cherry-paneled office of Hargrove and Bell Attorneys at Law, Clive Winkler was signing papers. his voice smooth as butter on hot toast. "My father's not himself lately. Talking to the help about private matters. It's not normal. I think it's time we considered power of attorney." Thursday was liver and onions day. Had been since 1987 when Dennis's doctor recommended it for his iron, and Helen always added extra bacon, the way her grandmother taught her. The bacon wasn't just for taste. It was the secret that made Mr. Winkler clean his plate like a growing boy, even at 82. This Thursday morning felt like any other. The coffee percolated with its familiar gurgling sound. The newspaper, a real paper, not one of those computer tablets, waited on the breakfast table, folded just so. Helen could hear the quiet rustle as Dennis turned the pages, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. In the kitchen, the old rotary phone hung on the wall, its curly cord stretched from years of people walking while they talked. Next to it was the drawer where Helen kept rubber bands, paper clips, and a book of S&H green stamps she'd never turned in. Some things you just couldn't throw away. You know how some conversations change everything? Like when the doctor says, "We need to talk," or your child says, "I'm getting married." This was that Thursday. The Thursday when everything that seemed fixed and certain suddenly wasn't. Helen hummed "In the Sweet By and By" as she sliced onions paper thin. The knife made a soft thwack-thwack against the wooden cutting board. The smell of liver soaking in milk filled the kitchen. Not everyone's favorite smell, but one that meant Thursday in this house as surely as church bells meant Sunday. At noon, the pressure cooker began to whistle like an old steam train. Perry Mason's familiar theme song drifted from the study, where Dennis watched reruns during lunch. The house felt peaceful, almost drowsy in the afternoon sun. But by 6 o'clock, everything changed. The dining room gleamed under the light of the Tiffany chandelier, the one Dennis's father had bought during the Depression for less than it would cost to fix a leaky faucet these days. Shadows danced across the Norman Rockwell prints on the wall. Children fishing, a doctor with a stethoscope, families at Thanksgiving. "All three of you, here on a Thursday." Dennis's voice carried a note Helen had never heard before, like he was watching a play he'd already seen. Must be a special occasion. Clive sat at his father's right hand, scrolling through his phone under the table. Diana pushed liver around her plate, her diamond bracelet catching the light. Marcus, surprisingly sober, kept checking his watch. "You've probably pretended to be sicker than you were, just to see who really cared." Dennis was doing that, but with millions at stake. It happened between the main course and dessert, Helen's apple brown Betty, still warm from the oven. Dennis's water glass slipped from his hand. His face went slack. He slid sideways in his chair and then down to the oriental carpet that had once belonged to some Russian prince. What happened next told the whole story. Clive jumped up, not to help his father, but to rush to the study. Diana screamed, her hands flying to her face but her eyes darting to the credenza where important papers were kept. Marcus froze, useless as a store mannequin. Only Helen moved to help. She checked his pulse, thready but there. She cradled his head, years of caring for her mother guiding her hands. She reached for the rotary phone on the sideboard and dialed for help. Dennis's eyes opened just a slit. His hand, liver-spotted but strong, gripped Helen's wrist. "Not yet," he whispered, so low only she could hear. "Not hospital. Study. Later." Hours later, when the children had finally gone home, convinced their father just needed rest, Dennis sat wrapped in his navy wool blanket in the study. The blanket felt scratchy against Helen's hands as she tucked it around his shoulders, but Dennis loved it. Said it reminded him of when choices were simple. Follow orders, stay alive. "They went for the papers, Helen. Not for me." His voice sounded tired but clear. "Did you see that?" The study smelled of old books and pipe tobacco, though Dennis hadn't smoked in 20 years. A real fire crackled in the grate, not one of those electric ones that just look like fire. Dennis pointed to a footlocker under his desk, battered olive drab with Winkler D. stenciled in white. "The combination is November 14th, 45. Veterans Day, the year the war ended." Inside, under folded uniforms that smelled of mothballs, lay a sealed envelope. "The real will," Dennis said. "Not the one Clive thinks he knows about." Back in 1979, Dennis said, leaning forward in his leather chair. You could destroy a man with 3 forged documents and 1 bribed inspector. No computers to check. No Google to verify. His eyes looked past Helen to something far away. I did that to Moses Akanum, my partner, my friend, the man who taught me the shipping business. Helen's heart thumped hard against her ribs. This was why he'd called for her in the storm. This was why the bathroom confession. A knock at the door made them both jump. Mrs. Patterson entered, carrying a notary stamp and wearing a coat over her nightgown. Sorry I'm late, Dennis. My arthritis doesn't like these late hours like it used to. She'd been notarizing documents since 1975. Her rubber stamp as official as a judge's gavel in this town. She watched with bird-bright eyes as Dennis signed the codicil, the same document from the storm night, and then stamped it with her seal. This makes it all legal, Dennis said to Helen. This puts you in charge of fixing what I broke. From a desk drawer, Dennis pulled out his father's wax seal. A W, surrounded by oak leaves. He melted blue wax onto the envelope seam and pressed the seal into it. Now it's done. What nobody knew was that Diana had used her old key to slip into the house while they were in the study. She searched Helen's small room at the back of the house, expecting to find jewelry or cash or some proof that the maid was stealing. Instead, she found only a worn prayer book that had belonged to Helen's mother and $47 in emergency money hidden in a sock. Diana left disappointed, not realizing the real treasure was being sealed with wax in the study below. By morning, that wax seal would be missing from Dennis's desk. And Clive, coming to check on father, would have telltale blue wax under his fingernails. Death has a smell, not decay, but something else, like a Woolworth's going out of business sale. Everything familiar about to disappear forever. Helen noticed it the moment she opened Dennis's bedroom door Friday morning. The scent of endings hung in the air, mixing with Bengay and peppermint. The doctor, not a young one with a computer, but an old one who still carried a black bag like on Marcus Welby MD, had come and gone before dawn. His words still echoed in the hallway. A week, maybe less. You know how vultures circle? They don't attack, they just wait. That's what Dennis's children became that week. Well-dressed vultures. They made a schedule on Diana's fancy stationery. Visiting hours divided like slices of pie, never overlapping. None of them wanted to be alone with their father, but none of them trusted the others to be alone with him either. They're afraid I'll change my mind, Dennis whispered to Helen as she straightened his pillows. His skin felt papery under her fingers, like the pages of the Bible her mother used to read every night. They're afraid I'll give it all to the cat shelter. Helen smiled. You don't even like cats, Mr. Winkler. That's what would make it so perfect. His laugh turned into a cough that shook the whole bed. By Saturday, Dennis's bedroom looked like a hospital room in someone's house. The oxygen machine in the corner made a sound like an old aquarium pump. Whoosh, click, keeping time like a clock nobody wanted to watch. But Dennis's war medals still gleamed on the dresser. Helen polished them every morning, just like always. The Price is Right played on the small TV in the kitchen where Helen ate her lunch. Bob Barker's voice called out numbers that made people jump up and down. Helen thought about numbers too. How many days Dennis had left, how much money his children thought they would get, how many times she'd climbed these same stairs carrying trays of food that now went untouched. You've probably sat with someone dying. Time moves different, like molasses in January. Minutes stretch like taffy, then hours disappear in a blink. Helen felt every tick of the grandfather clock in her bones as she sat by Dennis's bed, reading from his favorite Tom Clancy novel, the one with the submarine. His eyes stayed closed, but his fingers tapped against the blanket when the story got exciting. Clive came at 2 o'clock sharp each day, his visits timed to the minute like a parking meter. He'd stand at the foot of the bed, never sitting, never touching. He'd ask about affairs in order and paperwork, and the firm's future. Never about pain or comfort or memories. He's checking to see if I'm still breathing, Dennis said after Clive left on Sunday. Counting the minutes. Diana brought flowers. Always lilies, always too many. their smell so strong it made Helen's eyes water. She'd adjust her father's blankets with her diamond rings flashing, then check her watch every 3 minutes until she could leave. Marcus would arrive rumpled and reeking of last night's whiskey. He'd slump in the corner chair, scrolling through his phone, occasionally looking up as if surprised to find himself in a dying man's room. It was Monday evening when everything changed. The children had gone. The house settled into creaks and sighs. Dennis, clearer-eyed than he'd been in days, motioned Helen closer. "Bring me the Whitman sampler from the study." His voice was soft but steady. The yellow box was where it always was, on the shelf behind his desk, next to leather-bound books nobody ever read. The chocolates inside were probably older than some of the staff. Dennis had a sweet tooth once, but not for years now. "Look under the paper," he said when she returned. Beneath the crinkly brown paper that separated the layers of candy was a key, old brass, heavy, with a red ribbon tied through its loop. "River House," Dennis said. "North bedroom closet. Behind the hunting coats." Helen felt the weight of the key in her palm. It was warm, as if it had been waiting for her. "Not just papers there, Helen. Recordings too. Tapes." "Tapes?" she asked. The word seemed to belong to another time, like flashbulbs or typewriter ribbons. Reel-to-reel tapes, kids today wouldn't recognize them, but in the 70s that's how business got recorded. Dennis had kept them all, like Nixon but smarter. Every conversation about Moses, every plan to destroy him. All on tape, all in Dennis's own voice. Dennis's eyes locked onto hers. "I recorded everything. Every meeting, every phone call. Every plan to ruin Moses. My own voice planning to destroy a good man." He closed his eyes, exhausted by truth. "Why keep such things?" Helen asked, tucking the key into her apron pocket. "Evidence against myself," he said. "Punishment, maybe, or just knowing someday someone would need to hear the whole truth. That someone is you, Helen." Tuesday brought rain that tapped against the windows like impatient fingers. The bedroom felt smaller, the air heavier. Lila, the ex-wife nobody mentioned, appeared like a ghost at the back door, elegant in a black raincoat, her white hair perfect despite the downpour. "Give him this," she said, pressing an envelope into Helen's hand. "And this is for you." A second envelope, heavier. "Bank statements," she whispered. "Accounts the children think no one knows about. Proof of what they've been taking." Before Helen could ask why, Lila was gone, her expensive perfume lingering in the hallway like a question. That night, Dennis couldn't sleep. Pain etched lines around his mouth that even the strongest pills couldn't smooth away. Helen sat beside him, her hand on his, the house quiet except for the oxygen machine's steady rhythm. "My mother loved Amazing Grace," Dennis said suddenly, his voice floating up through layers of medication. "Sang it every Sunday in the choir. Wore a blue robe with gold trim." Helen nodded, remembering her own mother in the hospice, asking for the same hymn. "Would you?" Dennis's question hung in the air. Helen hadn't sung in years, not since her mother's funeral. But she opened her mouth and the words came, soft and clear in the dim room. "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. That saved a wretch like me." Dennis's breathing changed, deeper, steadier. His fingers relaxed in hers. By the time she reached bright shining as the sun, his eyes had closed, his face peaceful for the first time in weeks. Wednesday was a blur of doctors and nurses and children arriving with lawyers in tow. Papers were signed. Machines beeped. Helen moved through it all like a shadow, always near Dennis but never noticed by the important people with clipboards and stern faces. During a rare moment alone, Dennis gripped her hand with surprising strength. "Moses first," he whispered. "Find him. The ferry terminal repair shop. Tell him." A coughing fit took the rest of his words. When he could speak again, his voice was fainter. "Helen, when I'm gone, before the reading, go to the River House. Take everything. Safety deposit box at First National. I made you a signer last month. They don't know." Each word seemed to cost him dearly, like coins dropped from a shrinking purse. Thursday passed in a haze of waiting. Dennis slept most of the day, his breathing shallow, his skin the color of old candle wax. Helen read to him from the Bible, not because Dennis was religious, but because the words were sturdy and had lasted through worse times than this. The children came and went, their faces grim, their whispers in the hallway growing more urgent. Helen caught fragments, legal options, mental capacity. That woman. Friday dawn broke with light the color of old pearls. Helen had dozed in the chair by Dennis's bed, her neck stiff, her dreams tangled with hymns and river houses and secrets. The change in the oxygen machine's rhythm woke her. Whoosh, click, whoosh, click. Dennis's eyes were open, looking not at her but at something beyond the windows, beyond the hills, beyond the reaching trees. "Mr. Winkler?" she said softly. His gaze shifted to her face. His lips moved. Helen leaned close. "Forgive," he whispered. Just that. One word. Then the room was suddenly bigger, emptier, though nothing had changed except the silence where his breathing had been. Helen looked at the bedside clock. 5:47 a.m. Exactly when she would have arrived for work on any normal day for the past 20 years. She sat holding his hand until it grew cool, the house waking around her. Pipes knocking, heat coming on, birds starting their morning songs as if this day was like any other. She was still sitting there when Clive burst in without knocking. His face flushed from rushing, his phone already at his ear. "He's gone," Helen said simply. Clive didn't respond to her words. He spoke into the phone. "It's done. Start the process immediately." He didn't look at his father. He looked at the dresser, the closet, the nightstand, places where papers might be hidden. By noon, the children had emptied Dennis's study. Filing cabinets stood open, desk drawers pulled out, books removed from shelves and shaken to dislodge anything hidden between pages. By 3 o'clock, a locksmith had changed the locks on all the doors. By 4, security guards stood at each entrance, with specific instructions about who could enter and who could not. By 5, Helen received a letter on law firm stationery. It contained 2 things: her final paycheck and a notice that Clive Winkler had filed an emergency injunction to freeze all estate assets due to credible concerns regarding undue influence by domestic staff. What Clive didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Helen had already visited the safety deposit box. The River House key was no longer in her apron pocket. And Dennis's final, most important words weren't "forgive," but what he had whispered to her Tuesday night while the rain played its sad song on the windows. "Don't let them win, Helen. Don't let the vultures pick my bones before I've done what's right." The law office of Brennan, Baker, and Associates hadn't seen this much drama since the Vanderbilt divorce in '73, and Mr. Brennan had seen that one personally. Back then, his hair was still black, not the perfect white it was now as he adjusted his bow tie in the hallway mirror. Helen knew she was late. The number 9 bus had broken down halfway up Maple Street, black smoke pouring from under its hood like an angry dragon. She'd had to walk the rest of the way in her good shoes, the ones she saved for church and funerals. Her feet already hurt, and the day had barely begun. The waiting room smelled exactly like important places used to smell: old leather law books and lemon pledge, with just a hint of pipe tobacco, though no one had smoked in there since the Carter administration. The oak-paneled walls reminded Helen of that old TV show Ironside. All dark wood and serious business. The receptionist looked up from her romance novel, surprised to see Helen standing there in her Sunday dress, clutching her mother's purse like it contained diamonds instead of bus tokens and peppermint candies. "You're here for the Winkler reading?" she asked, her voice full of doubt. Helen nodded, feeling every bit the outsider. "Mr. Brennan is expecting me." Behind the reception desk, an adding machine clicked away. Not a calculator or computer, but a real adding machine with a paper roll that curled out like a tongue. The sound took Helen back to her first job at the Five and Dime, counting the day's take with Mrs. Murphy. Through the heavy doors, she could hear voices already. Clive's loudest of all. "We really should begin. Her bus probably didn't come. These city services, I tell you." Mr. Brennan's voice answered, patient as a Sunday school teacher. We'll give her a few more minutes, Clive. Your father was very specific about all parties being present. Helen took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The conference room hushed like a church when the bride appears. 8 pairs of eyes turned to her. The 3 Winkler children, their lawyers, Mr. Brennan, his assistant, and a small man with glasses who sat beside a video camera. The long mahogany table gleamed like a mirror, reflecting faces that reminded Helen of hungry cats watching a bird feeder. At the head sat Mr. Brennan, bow tie perfect, hands folded on top of a thick folder with Winkler typed on its tab. You know that moment in Perry Mason when the real document appears? This was better. Ah, Helen, please, take a seat. Mr. Brennan gestured to an empty chair, a wooden one that forced good posture, not one of the soft leather ones where the Winklers sat. Now we can begin. Clive checked his gold watch. Diana dabbed at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Marcus slouched, already looking bored. Mr. Brennan cleared his throat and opened the folder. We are gathered to read the last will and testament of Dennis Mortimer Winkler, dated September 30th of this year. That's less than 2 weeks ago, Clive interrupted, leaning forward. Dad was already sick then. Your father was of sound mind, as witnessed and verified. Mr. Brennan continued, unruffled. We'll proceed with the standard bequests first. What followed was like listening to a shopping list of treasures. The grandfather clock to Diana, the summer house in Maine to Marcus, the art collection to various museums, the family silver to Clive. Helen sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, waiting. Dennis had prepared her, but still, her heart hammered against her ribs like it wanted out. And now, Mr. Brennan said, turning a page, we come to the disposition of the Winkler Foundation assets and controlling interest in Winkler Shipping Industries. The air in the room seemed to thin. Clive sat up straighter. Diana stopped pretending to cry. Even Marcus looked alert now. To my son, Clive Weston Winkler, I leave. Mr. Brennan paused, adjusting his glasses. 10% voting share and a lifetime seat on the board, conditional upon his completion of 1 year's service as safety inspector on the loading docks of Terminal 6. The silence was so complete Helen could hear the adding machine still clicking in the outer office. What? Clive's voice cracked like a teenage boy's. That's impossible. There must be a mistake. Mr. Brennan continued as if he hadn't heard. To my daughter, Diana Lila Winkler, I leave 10% voting share and a lifetime seat on the board, conditional upon her completion of 1 year's service as accounts payable clerk in the main office, at standard entry-level salary. Diana's mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. To my son, Marcus James Winkler, I leave 10% voting share and a lifetime seat on the board, conditional upon his completion of 1 year's service as inventory clerk at the Port Authority warehouse. Marcus actually laughed, a sharp bark of disbelief. The old man lost his marbles. This will is trash. Mr. Brennan looked up, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. I assure you, this document is legally binding and your father was perfectly sound of mind. Then who gets controlling interest? Clive demanded, his face flushing red. Who gets the other 70%? Mr. Brennan set down the will and looked directly at Helen. Ms. Bainey, do you have the document your employer entrusted to you? This was her moment. Helen opened her mother's purse and removed the envelope sealed with the blue wax and the W stamp. She handed it to Mr. Brennan, aware of 6 pairs of Winkler eyes burning into her like laser beams. This is a codicil to the will, Mr. Brennan explained, breaking the seal carefully. A legal edition that your father signed and had notarized on the night before he died. The night she was alone with him, Clive hissed. How convenient. Mr. Brennan ignored him, unfolding the document. He read silently for a moment, then looked up. According to this codicil, witnessed by Mrs. Eliza Patterson, notary public since 1975, and bearing your father's signature with its distinctive loop, the remaining 70% controlling interest in Winkler Shipping Industries, as well as full executorship of the Winkler Foundation's charitable trust, is hereby granted to Helen Marie Bainey. You've been in a room where everybody suddenly realizes the game has changed, like when Kennedy was shot or the market crashed in '87. One minute, the world looks one way. The next, everything is different. Clive's face turned purple as his father's favorite cigars. Diana gasped like someone had dumped ice water down her back. Marcus started to laugh again, then stopped when he realized no one was joining him. This is absurd. Clive slammed his hand on the table. She's the maid. For God's sake. She manipulated a dying man. I have a video your father recorded, Mr. Brennan said quietly. The small man with glasses stepped forward, positioning a TV on a rolling cart. He asked that it be played in exactly this circumstance. The screen flickered to life. There was Dennis, sitting up in his bed, looking tired but clear-eyed. The date stamp in the corner showed just 3 days before he died. If you're watching this, Dennis began, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Then Helen has delivered the codicil as I asked, and Clive is turning purple. He smiled slightly. Son, you always did look like an eggplant when you got mad. Just like your grandfather. Diana made a small choking sound. I am of sound mind, Dennis continued. Dr. Lawrence has certified this. What I am about to say is my true and final wish. Dennis shifted in the bed, leaning closer to the camera. I built Winkler Shipping with blood and sweat, but I also built it with lies. In 1979, I destroyed a man named Moses Ecanem. He was my partner, my friend. I forged documents, bribed officials, and stole his company from under him. The details are all in the River House. Every tape, every document, every rotten thing I did. Helen heard Marcus whisper Jesus Christ under his breath. Helen Bainey has worked for me for 20 years, Dennis continued. In that time, she has shown more integrity than anyone I've known, including myself. I am entrusting her with my legacy not because I want to punish my children, but because I want to repair the damage I've done. The Winkler fortune was built on a crime. Helen will ensure it helps the victims of that crime. Dennis coughed, then recovered. To my children, if you fulfill the conditions I've set, you'll have your board seats and your shares. If not, those go to Helen too. This is not punishment. This is opportunity to earn what you've always felt entitled to. The video ended with Dennis looking directly into the camera. Helen, I'm sorry for the burden, but you're the only one with clean hands. The screen went blue. No one spoke. An executor, think of it like being the captain of someone's last wishes. You don't own the ship, but you decide where it sails. Dennis made Helen captain of a very big ship, and his children just became passengers. This is illegal, Clive finally spluttered. We'll contest it. She coerced him. You're welcome to try, Mr. Brennan said mildly. But your father anticipated that. The video was recorded with witnesses. The signature has been verified. Mrs. Patterson has given a sworn statement. And there's more evidence at the River House, which I believe Ms. Bainey has already secured. Helen nodded slightly. She'd been to the River House the night before, used her bus pass one last time, carrying an empty suitcase that didn't stay empty long. Dad wasn't himself at the end. Diana tried, her voice wobbling. He was confused. Medicated. The medical reports disagree, Mr. Brennan said. Now there are papers for Ms. Bainey to sign. As executor, she has immediate access to the foundation accounts and control of all business decisions regarding Winkler Shipping. She's a maid, Clive shouted, standing now. She cleans toilets. Helen finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. Yes, Mr. Winkler. I clean toilets. I've cleaned yours for 20 years. I know every mess your family makes. Maybe that's why your father trusted me to clean up this one too. The signing took almost an hour. Helen's hand cramped around the heavy fountain pen Mr. Brennan provided. The lawyers explained things in simple terms about trusts and accounts and signing authority. With each signature, Helen felt the weight grow heavier on her shoulders. When it was done, Mr. Brennan shook her hand. Congratulations, Ms. Bainey. You are now worth approximately $30 million and control a foundation with assets of over $100 million. I don't want it for myself, Helen said. Mr. Winkler was clear about that. Noble, Clive sneered, gathering his coat. We'll see how long that lasts. Everyone has their price. The Winkler children left first. Clive storming out, Diana sobbing into her handkerchief, Marcus looking thoughtful for the first time Helen could remember. When Helen finally stepped out of the law office, she was surprised to find a crowd on the sidewalk. Reporters with microphones, cameras flashing. Someone had tipped them off. "Ms. Bainey, is it true you inherited the Winkler fortune? Were you having a relationship with Dennis Winkler? Did you manipulate a dying man?" The questions hit her like hail on a tin roof. Helen clutched her mother's purse, now holding papers that made her responsible for $30 million, and pushed through the crowd without answering. Behind her, she heard Clive's voice, smooth as butter now, talking to the reporters. "My father was not in his right mind. We're exploring legal options. This woman took advantage." Helen walked to the bus stop, her good shoes pinching her toes. For the first time in 20 years, she didn't need to worry about the fare. She could have called a taxi, could have called a limousine. But she sat on the bench and waited for the number 9, just like always. A young reporter followed her, notebook in hand. "Ms. Bainey, what will you do with the money?" Helen looked up at him. He couldn't have been more than 25, about the age Moses had been when Dennis destroyed him. "Find the man who really earned it," she said simply, "and give it back." What Helen didn't know was that across town, in the wood-paneled dining room of the Ocean View Yacht Club, Marcus Winkler was already gathering allies. Helen Bainey had a nervous breakdown 10 years ago. He lied smoothly to the family lawyer. Spent 2 weeks in a psychiatric facility. Clearly not competent to manage a dollar store, let alone a shipping empire. The lie would be in tomorrow's paper, right under the headline already being written, "MAID or Mastermind?" The river house looked like something from a Norman Rockwell painting that got left in the rain. Beautiful bones, but nobody home for decades. It sat back from the water, watching the river flow by like an old man who'd seen too much to be surprised anymore. Helen stood on the gravel driveway, key in hand. Her bus ride to this forgotten corner of the county had taken 2 hours. Now, with the afternoon sun warm on her back, she faced the place where Dennis had hidden his darkest secrets. The key from the Whitman sampler box was heavy in her palm, real brass, not like the cheap aluminum copies they make nowadays. Turned in the lock with a sound like bones cracking. Inside, the air smelled of mothballs and old National Geographic magazines, that yellow page smell that takes you straight back to your grandparents' house. Sheets covered the furniture like ghosts having a meeting. The floorboards creaked under Helen's sensible shoes, just like at her grandmother's house where she'd spent summers as a girl. Along one wall hung a row of servant bells, the kind rich folks used to ring when they wanted tea or help with their shoes. Each bell had a room name under it: master bedroom, study, dining room. Nobody had pulled those cords in 30 years, but Helen could almost hear their jingle-jangle echo. She ran her finger along a sideboard, leaving a line in dust thick as flour. This wasn't the dust of weeks or months. This was the dust of forgotten years, of memories nobody wanted to visit anymore. You know how attics hold secrets? Like finding your parents' love letters or your report cards. This attic held enough secrets to sink a dynasty. Helen found the narrow stairs behind the kitchen, each step groaning under her weight like it was telling her to turn back. The attic stretched the length of the house, lit only by small windows at each end. Helen pulled the chain on a bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Light spread across a room that looked more like a library than an attic. Boxes stacked neatly, labeled by year. Filing cabinets lined one wall. And in the center, a reel-to-reel tape machine sat on a desk, waiting like a patient confessor. North bedroom closet. Behind the hunting coats, Dennis had said. Helen found the closet easily. Inside hung 3 hunting jackets, still smelling faintly of pipe tobacco and river mud. Behind them, built into the wall, was a door no taller than her shoulder. It opened to reveal a space like a small room, walls lined with shelves. Every shelf filled with boxes, files, ledgers. Dennis hadn't just kept evidence. He'd organized it, preserved it, like a museum of his own sins. On the top shelf sat a shoebox, not a modern one with a logo, but an old cardboard one from Tom McKin's shoes. Inside, Helen found Kodak photo envelopes, the yellow kind with the date stamped on the front. She opened the first one. The emotional peak hit her like a punch to the heart. There they were, Dennis and Moses, arms around each other's shoulders, standing on a jetty. Dennis, young, handsome, hungry-looking. Moses, taller, with kind eyes and hands that looked strong enough to lift an engine block. Between them stood a woman with a smile that seemed to light up the photo from within. And in front, a boy about 10, gap-toothed and happy. They looked so hopeful, so unaware of the betrayal to come. Helen turned the photo over. Written in faded blue ink, Dennis, Moses, Ava and Jonah, opening day, Icahn and Winkler shipping 1977. She sat on an old steamer trunk, the photo trembling in her hands. This wasn't business. This was family. These were people who trusted each other. The ledgers came next, black, hardbound books with years written on their spines. Helen opened 1978, then 1979. The pages were filled with numbers, but what caught her eye was the red ink. Someone, Dennis, had gone through and circled figures, changed numbers, added columns of debt that grew like cancer across the pages. Next to the ledger for 1979 was a folder labeled simply, The Plan. Inside, Helen found what looked like a script, step-by-step instructions for destroying Moses Icahn, create false delivery failures, forge loan documents, bribe Henderson at the bank, file papers before Moses returns from Nigeria, change locks at office. It was all there, not hidden but preserved. Like Dennis had kept evidence against himself all these years, waiting for Judgment Day. You've probably wondered if successful people played dirty. Here was proof that at least one did. The kind of proof that could destroy the Winkler name forever. Helen turned to the tape machine next. The reels were labeled by date. She chose one marked, Final Meeting Icahn, June 12, 1979. With hands that remembered record players and 8-track tapes, she threaded the thin brown ribbon through the machine and pressed play. Dennis's voice filled the attic. Not the old man she knew, but a young man hungry for power. Confident. Cruel. Moses, be reasonable. The company is underwater. These loan documents prove it. Either sign over your share, or we both go down. Another voice, deeper, with an accent that made ordinary words sound like poetry. Dennis, these numbers are wrong. We just shipped the Thompson order. We're fine. The Thompson shipment never arrived. It was lost at sea. That's impossible. I confirmed delivery myself. Your word against the paperwork, Moses. Who do you think the bank will believe? An immigrant with an accent or these documents? Helen's stomach tightened as she listened to the trap closing. Moses fighting, Dennis lying, the truth being buried under an avalanche of forgeries and bribes. On another tape, Dennis laughed with someone named Henderson from the bank. They joked about that African fool and split a finder's fee for the ruined business. The last tape was different, made just a year ago. Dennis alone, speaking to no one, his old man's voice cracking with regret. I destroyed them all. Moses lost everything. Ava died without medicine they couldn't afford. The boy, Jonah, disappeared into the foster system. For what? For ships. For money. God help me. Helen switched off the machine. The silence felt heavy as a church after a funeral. Hostile takeover sounds fancy, but in 1979 it was simple as forge, file, and foreclose. Forge the debt papers. File them with the court. Foreclose on your partner's share. If he couldn't afford lawyers, and Moses couldn't, you won by default. By the time Helen had gone through half the evidence, night had fallen. She'd found what she needed, proof that Dennis had committed fraud, that Moses was the rightful owner of half the company, that the Winkler fortune was built on quicksand. But there was more. In the last envelope of photos, Helen found a recent newspaper clipping. Local repair shop celebrates 30 years. The small photo showed an older Moses Icahn standing outside a tiny shop by the ferry terminal. He was thinner, one eye clouded with cataracts, but unmistakably the same man from the jetty photo. Moses was alive. The next morning, Helen took the number 7 bus to the ferry terminal. The repair shop was exactly as pictured. A narrow storefront wedged between a check-cashing place and a dollar store. The sign, hand-painted and fading, read Ecanum Repairs. We fix anything. A bell jingled as Helen pushed open the door. The shop smelled of machine oil and electrical tape. Honest smells, working smells. Radios and toasters and old VCRs lined the shelves, all waiting to be brought back to life. At the counter, bent over a dismantled clock, sat Moses Ecanum. 40 years had turned his black hair white at the temples. His hands were still strong, but spotted with age. His left eye, milky with cataracts, stared at nothing while his right eye focused on tiny gears through a jeweler's loop. "Just a minute," he said without looking up, his deep voice exactly as it sounded on the tapes. Helen waited, her heart hammering against her ribs like it wanted to break free. When Moses finally looked up, his good eye squinted at her. "Can I help you, Mr. Ecanum?" Helen's voice came out smaller than she intended. "My name is Helen Bainey. I worked for Dennis Winkler." The change in Moses's face was like watching a door slam shut. Every line hardened. His shoulders stiffened. The name Winkler had hit him like a physical blow. "I have nothing to say about Dennis Winkler," he said, turning back to the clock. "Nothing fit for a lady's ears, anyway. Mr. Ecanum, Dennis died last week." Moses's hands paused over the clock. "Dead men can't apologize, but they can try to make things right." Helen reached into her bag and pulled out the jetty photo. She placed it on the counter between them. Moses stared at it, his good eye widening. His hand, steady enough to fix watches, trembled as he touched the image of the woman. "Ava," he whispered. "Your sister?" Helen asked softly. Moses nodded, unable to speak. "And the boy?" "Her son. My nephew, Jonah." Moses looked up at Helen, suspicion returning. "Why are you here? What does this have to do with me now?" Helen placed the tape player she'd brought on the counter. "Because Dennis left everything to me, with instructions to find you first." Moses laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Dennis Winkler left his fortune to his maid? That's a good one." "It's true. And I brought proof of what he did to you." Helen pressed play on the tape machine. Dennis's young voice filled the small shop, planning Moses's destruction. As Moses listened, tears welled in his good eye, trailing down his cheek like a silent river. His hands gripped the edge of the counter so hard his knuckles turned white. When the tape ended, the silence felt like it might crush them both. Finally, Moses looked up, his face transformed by a mixture of pain and relief. 40 years I wondered if I was crazy," he said, his voice breaking. "If I'd somehow imagined the numbers were right, if I'd failed my sister, my nephew. Thank you for proving I wasn't." Outside the repair shop, Helen didn't notice the man in the parked car across the street. Didn't see him take photos of her entering and leaving. Didn't know he'd followed her all the way from the river house. In a hotel room across town, Clive Winkler answered his phone. "Report," he barked. The private investigator's voice was smooth as oil. "She went to the river house, spent hours there, then visited some old black guy with a repair shop by the ferry. Find out everything about her," Clive said, lighting a cigar with a gold lighter. "Everyone has dirt. Find hers. I don't care what it costs." What Clive didn't know was that Helen Bainey's life had been an open book for 58 years. And the only secret she had was the one she'd just discovered, that sometimes justice takes decades, but it comes all the same. The new will appeared like a miracle, if miracles came from storage units in Newark and smelled like cigarettes and desperation. It arrived on Mr. Brennan's desk in a leather folder that looked old but wasn't. Like those fake antiques they sell to tourists, aged with tea stains and sandpaper. Helen first heard about it on her little kitchen radio while making tea in her apartment. The morning news said, "Winkler heir discovers father's true last will." Her hands shook so bad she spilled hot water on the counter. The fancy legal envelope from Brennan, Baker, and Associates arrived an hour later. Inside was a court order and a copy of what Clive claimed was Dennis's real will. It was dated just one day before Dennis died. And it gave everything. Every last penny, every ship, every brick of every building to his children. You know how forgers always make one mistake? Like in that episode of Murder, she wrote where the date was wrong? Clive made 3 mistakes. Helen spotted the first one right away, but she'd need help proving the others. Her tiny apartment felt smaller than ever that morning. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room just big enough for a sofa and her mother's rocking chair. The kitchen table where she sat reading the papers had been a wedding gift to her parents in 1952. The walls needed paint. The carpet needed replacing. But it was clean, Helen's clean, which meant you could eat off any surface without worry. The phone rang, the old kind with a real bell, not those beeping cell phones everyone carried now. "Have you seen the news, Ms. Bainey?" It was Mr. Brennan, sounding tired. "Just heard it on the radio. Turn on your television if you have one. Channel 4. Helen's TV was a Zenith from the 90s with dials that clicked when you turned them. She hadn't watched much since her mother died, just Wheel of Fortune sometimes and the Sunday night movies. Channel 4 showed a split screen that made Helen's stomach drop like an elevator with cut cables. On one side, the Winkler mansion on Leopard Hill, grand as a museum. On the other side, her apartment building, brick, ordinary, with laundry hanging on some balconies. The reporter's voice was smooth as store-bought icing. Sources close to the family say Helen Bainey, a maid employed by Dennis Winkler for 20 years, manipulated the dying billionaire into signing over his fortune. But today, Clive Winkler presented what experts are calling the authentic final will. The picture changed to Clive standing on the mansion steps, looking sad as a basset hound. All wrinkled forehead and droopy eyes. "My father was not himself in his final days," he told the cameras. "This woman took advantage of that. The will we've discovered shows his true wishes, to keep the Winkler legacy in family hands." Helen sank onto her sofa, feeling like someone had let all the air out of her body. The next segment was worse. Helen Bainey, age 58, has worked as domestic staff for the Winklers since 1996. Records show her mother required extensive medical care for Parkinson's disease, leaving the family with substantial debt. Critics suggest financial desperation may have motivated her actions. They showed a photo of Helen leaving work one day, hair in a bun, sensible shoes, looking tired after a long day. Then a picture of her mother's hospice bill someone had dug up from who knows where. That was the emotional peak. The moment Helen broke down and cried in her apartment, big heaving sobs that scared her cat, Mr. Whiskers. She hadn't cried like that since her mother died. Not because they'd exposed her debts, everyone has troubles, but because they'd made it sound dirty somehow. Like caring for her mother was a reason to steal. The headlines got worse as the day went on. Gold-digging maid caught in will scam. Winkler family fights back against servant's scheme. From cleaning floors to stealing fortunes. By afternoon, reporters camped outside her building. Neighbors who'd barely nodded hello for years suddenly had opinions about that woman in 3B. The bakery where she bought bread every Saturday asked her not to come back. Bad for business, you understand. You know what it's like when everyone thinks they know your story, but they don't know anything? That was Helen's September. Mr. Brennan called again that evening. "Don't give up, Ms. Bainey. I've seen the new will. Something's off about it." "The signature," Helen said immediately. "Dennis's crooked loop is missing." Crooked loop. When Mr. Winkler signed his name, he always made a little loop on the final R that curved back on itself, like a fishhook. Only when he was stressed or in pain he'd make it crooked, tilted to the right. The signature on the codicil has that crooked loop. The one on Clive's will doesn't have any loop at all. There was a pause on the line. Then Mr. Brennan said, "Ms. Bainey, have you ever considered a career in law?" For the first time that day, Helen smiled. Mr. Brennan hired what he called a document examiner. Like Columbo but for paper, he explained. The man arrived at his office wearing a bow tie and carrying a case full of lights and chemicals and magnifying glasses. Forensic document examination like Quincy, but for paper. They can tell when ink was made, when paper was manufactured, even how much pressure someone used to sign. Clive didn't know that. Kids today think computers solve everything, but sometimes it's chemistry and patience. The examiner found the second mistake right away. This paper has a watermark from a company that didn't exist until 2018, he said, holding a page to the light. Mr. Winkler supposedly signed this in 2023. The third mistake took longer. The examiner sniffed the ink, then put a tiny scraping under a microscope. This is mimeograph ink, he announced. Nobody's used mimeograph machines since the 1980s. But forgers love them. They think it makes documents look older. Helen remembered the smell of mimeograph sheets from school, that purple ink that smelled like alcohol and came off on your fingers. Fresh copies warm from the machine, handed out for spelling tests. With each discovery, Helen felt lighter, like stones were being lifted off her chest one by one. Then came the sound mistake. The examiner put on gloves and examined the typed portions of the will. These impressions were made by an IBM Selectric 3, very popular machine in the 80s and 90s. But look at the E. It's slightly off-center. That's distinctive to serial numbers in a batch made between 1987 and 1989. So? Helen asked. So the Winkler Company records show they replaced all their Selectrics with computers in 1995. No law firm would be using a 30-year-old typewriter for a billionaire's will in 2023. The evidence was mounting like snow before a blizzard. The wrong paper, the wrong ink, the wrong typewriter, and worst of all, the missing loop in Dennis's signature. But Clive had money, the kind of money that makes evidence disappear. He hired 3 experts who said Dennis's signature matched perfectly. He found a secretary who swore she saw Dennis sign the new will. He even produced a notary, a man named James Fuller, who claimed he'd witnessed the signing the day before Dennis died. That's where things stood when Helen's buzzer rang at midnight 3 days later. She wasn't sleeping anyway. Who could sleep with the weight of $30 million and a family's rage hanging over them? Through the peephole, Helen saw the last person she expected. Lila Winkler, Dennis's ex-wife, standing in the hall wearing a raincoat over silk pajamas. "Let me in," Lila said. Not a request but a command. "I have something you need." Lila Winkler had been beautiful once, was still handsome in that way rich women manage by paying people to hide their age. Her white hair was perfectly styled even at midnight. Her makeup didn't smudge even though she'd clearly been crying. "I don't expect you to trust me," she said, sitting primly on Helen's sofa. "God knows I wouldn't trust me either. But I want them to burn, Helen. Not you." "Them?" Helen asked, though she knew who Lila meant. "My children," Lila said, the words sharp as broken glass. "Dennis didn't tell you why we divorced, did he?" "No, of course not." She pulled a thick folder from her handbag, real leather with gold corners. "I left because I found out our children had been stealing from the company for years. Dennis covered it up. Said it would hurt the business if people knew." Inside the folder were bank statements, transfer records, loan documents, a paper trail of theft going back 15 years. Diana's boutique? Failing from day one, Dennis pumped $8 million into it. Marcus's gambling debts? Dennis paid them monthly. Clive's cocaine habit? More expensive than his Mercedes payments. The papers smelled faintly of Lila's perfume. Chanel No. 5, the same bottle on Helen's mother's dresser that she was never allowed to touch. "But this," Lila said, pulling out one final document. "This is what you really need." It was a newspaper clipping from 1992. Small, yellowed with age. The headline, "Local Notary Arrested for Document Fraud." And there was a photo of James Fuller, 30 years younger but unmistakable, being led away in handcuffs. Fuller was Clive's college roommate, Lila explained. Lost his notary license in '92. Got it back 10 years ago after rehabilitation. He's been Clive's go-to fixer ever since. The feel of that newspaper clipping in Helen's hands, slightly brittle, the ink raised if you ran your finger over it, was the feeling of truth. Solid. Undeniable. "Why are you helping me?" Helen asked. Lila's perfect lipstick twisted into something between a smile and a grimace. "Because Dennis was right about one thing, those children need to earn something for once in their spoiled lives. And because I want them to know their mother beat them at their own game." With Lila's evidence, Mr. Brennan went to court. The hearing was set for Monday morning, early before regular cases because important people were involved. The courtroom smelled like furniture polish and old books. Comforting smells from a time when things were built to last. Helen sat at a table with Mr. Brennan, wearing her only good dress, navy blue with small white flowers, made of a material they don't make anymore. Clive and his lawyers sat at the other table, all sharp suits and sharp smiles. Diana and Marcus sat behind them, looking bored and entitled. The judge, a woman old enough to remember when female judges were rare as four-leaf clovers, called for the evidence. Helen's heart pounded like a drum in a marching band as the document examiner brought out his lights and chemicals. The courtroom went silent as he placed both wills side by side. "Your Honor, if I may demonstrate," he said, switching on an ultraviolet light. Under its purple glow, the signatures told their story clear as day. The signature on Ms. Bainey's document glows blue, consistent with ink available in 2023. The signature on Mr. Winkler's new will glows green, indicating ink with fluorescent properties only available after 2024. A murmur ran through the courtroom like wind through dry leaves. Furthermore, the paper of the new will contains optical brighteners not used in legal documents until this year, well after the supposed signing date. The examiner continued, building a castle of evidence brick by solid brick. The wrong paper, the wrong ink, the typewriter that shouldn't exist, and most damning of all, James Fuller's criminal record for forgery, carefully hidden for decades. With each revelation, Clive's face grew darker, like storm clouds gathering. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. Diana started to cry, real tears this time, not the crocodile kind she'd used at the will reading. The final blow came when Mr. Brennan played a video that Dennis had left in the safety deposit box, dated just 2 days before he died. "If you're seeing this," Dennis's tired face said from the screen, "it means Clive has forged a new will. He's done it before. Check the Cayman accounts from 2015. He'll use Fuller as his notary. The paper will be wrong. Clive never could tell good quality from bad. And he'll forget my signature loop. He always said it was affected, not worth the effort to copy." The courtroom fell silent as a church at midnight. Even the court reporter's fingers paused above her machine. The expert held both signatures under the ultraviolet light. One glowed blue, real. One glowed green, fake. Clive's lawyer asked for a recess. Clive asked for his heart medication. Helen sat very still, hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for a bus. Not gloating, not crying, just waiting for justice to finish its slow, certain work. The judge called a 15-minute recess. As people filed out, Diana Winkler slipped into the seat beside Helen. Her designer perfume couldn't quite hide the smell of fear. "I had nothing to do with the forgery," she whispered. "That was all Clive. I'll support you, testify if I have to, if you'll just give me the Hamptons house. I'm not like my brothers. I just want what's fair." Helen looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time. Diana Winkler was 43 years old but looked older, her face tight from too many procedures, her eyes darting like a cornered animal's. "Your father wanted you to work as an accounts payable clerk for 1 year," Helen said gently. "That's all. Just learn the value of earning something. Then you get your share and your board seat. Work? As a clerk." Diana said the word like it tasted of medicine. "I can't possibly." "Then I can't possibly give you the Hamptons house," Helen replied, standing as the bailiff called them back to court. What Diana didn't understand, what none of the Winklers understood, was that Helen never wanted their houses or their yachts or their fancy clothes. She wanted what Dennis had asked for with his dying breath. Forgiveness. Not for him, for what his fortune had done to everyone it touched. Judge Martha Henderson, appointed by Reagan, tough as a $2 steak, had seen every scam since 1981, but this one made her actually lean forward. She peered over her reading glasses at the packed courtroom like a teacher who caught someone passing notes. The courtroom smelled like old wood and floor wax, with just a hint of coffee from the bailiff's cup. Helen sat at the table with Mr. Brennan, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Across the aisle, Clive and his team of lawyers looked like an army in expensive suits. Every seat was filled. Dock workers in their clean shirts sat next to reporters with notepads. Curious neighbors rubbed elbows with business people who wanted to see a Winkler fall. In the back row, so quiet you might miss him, sat Moses Akanum in a borrowed suit that hung loose on his thin frame. "All rise," the bailiff called. His voice bouncing off walls that had heard a million lies and maybe a few truths. Judge Henderson didn't waste time on smiles. "We're here to determine the validity of two conflicting documents. The codicil presented by Ms. Bainey and the so-called new will presented by Mr. Winkler. Let's not drag this out longer than necessary." The sound of the court stenographer's keys, not a recording, but real fingers hitting Real keys, tapped like gentle rain as the judge spoke. Helen had never noticed that sound before, like tiny hammers building a house of words. The first witness was Helen herself. She felt the smooth leather Bible under her palm as she swore to tell the truth. The words felt heavy in her mouth, important as stones. "Ms. Bainey," Mr. Brennan asked gently, "please tell the court about the night Mr. Winkler gave you the codicil." Helen spoke simply, her voice steady despite her nerves. She described the storm, the power outage, Dennis calling for her while his children argued downstairs, the bathroom meeting, the trembling hands on her shoulders, the blue wax seal. He said, "If they see this before you do, they'll bury me before I'm dead," Helen recalled. Then he told me about Moses Akanum and what he'd done to him in 1979. Clive's lawyer, a man with a smile like a shark and cufflinks worth more than Helen's car, stood up to question her. "Ms. Bainey, isn't it convenient that Mr. Winkler supposedly signed this document with only you present? No family members? No other witnesses except a notary who's been a friend of yours for years." "Mrs. Patterson was Dennis's notary since 1975. Helen corrected him. "I met her that night for the first time. And yes, Dennis wanted privacy. He was afraid." "Afraid of his own children?" The shark smile widened. "Afraid they'd stop him from doing what was right." Next came the document experts, the same ones from the forgery hearing, plus new ones hired by Judge Henderson herself. They explained again about the paper, the ink, the missing loop in the signature. You could hear the courtroom holding its breath when the judge said, "Call your next witness, Mr. Brennan." The plaintiff calls Moses Akanum. The courtroom rippled like a pond when a stone drops in. Moses walked slowly to the witness stand, his good eye steady, his blind one milky in the fluorescent light. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, something he'd been waiting 40 years to do. "Mr. Akanum," Mr. Brennan began, "please tell the court about your relationship with Dennis Winkler." Moses's deep voice filled the room. "We met in 1974. Both young men with big dreams and small wallets. Dennis had ideas. I had experience. My father owned ships in Nigeria. We became partners in 1976. Friends, too. Our families shared meals, holidays. And what happened in 1979? The emotional peak. The moment the room went so quiet you could hear heartbeats. Came when Moses described finding his office locks changed, his name removed from the company letterhead, and bank accounts suddenly showing massive debts he never knew about. "My sister Ava was sick, cancer," Moses said, his voice catching. "The medical bills kept coming. But suddenly our company was bankrupt. Dennis told me I had to sign over my shares or face charges for fraud. I had no money for lawyers, so I signed." "And what happened to your sister?" Mr. Brennan asked gently. "She died 6 months later. The treatment stopped when the money did." "And her son?" "Your nephew. Jonah went into foster care. I couldn't support him on what I made fixing radios. I lost track of him for many years." Helen felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Around the courtroom, others were wiping their eyes too. Even one of Clive's lawyers looked away, suddenly interested in his legal pad. Then came the surprise that made the room gasp. Mr. Brennan asked, "Mr. Akanum, how do you feel about Dennis Winkler now?" Moses looked straight at Dennis's empty chair, as if seeing him there. "I forgive him," he said simply. "Not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace." You know that moment in 12 Angry Men when everything turns? When the truth becomes undeniable. That happened at 2:37 p.m. when Mr. Brennan said, "Your Honor, we have one more piece of evidence. A video Mr. Winkler made the day before he died." The TV was wheeled in again. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly, and there was Dennis, skeletal, pale but clear-eyed, looking directly into the camera. "If this tape is being played, it means exactly what I predicted has happened," he began. "Clive has forged a new will. He's done it before, the Alpine property in 2015, the boat slip in 2019. He thinks I never knew." Clive half rose from his chair, his face going white as typing paper. "He'll have used James Fuller as his notary. They've been fixing documents together since college. The signature will be wrong. Clive never could copy my loop correctly. Says it's affected." Dennis continued, his thin mouth almost smiling. "And he'll have Diana and Marcus backing him, because they always do what Big Brother says." The visual scene that everyone would remember forever happened next. As Dennis detailed every step of the forgery, exactly how it had been done, exactly when, exactly where, Clive's face crumpled like paper in a fist. He clutched his chest, gasped for air, and slid from his chair onto the polished courtroom floor. For one wild moment, Helen thought he was having a heart attack. But the court medical officer checked him quickly and announced, "He's fine. Just fainted." When Clive came to, slumped in his chair with an ice pack on his neck, the biggest surprise of all walked through the courtroom doors. Marcus Winkler, disheveled as always but stone-cold sober, asked to address the court. "Your Honor," he said, standing awkwardly in the aisle, "I need to tell the truth. I knew about the forgery. Clive told me what he was doing, and he swallowed hard. I went along with it, like always, but I'm done. Dad was right about us, we never earned anything. We just took." The expectation flip hit the room like a cold wave. The playboy brother, the family drunk, the eternal screw-up, was the only one with a conscience. "Ms. Bainey didn't manipulate anyone," Marcus continued. "Dad talked about her for years, how she was the only honest person in his life, how she took care of her mother without complaining, how she never asked for anything." He turned to Helen, his eyes red. "I'm sorry." Judge Henderson's gavel came down with a crack that made everyone jump. "In light of the evidence, I am ruling the codicil presented by Helen Bainey is valid and enforceable. The so-called new will is a forgery. She wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am referring Clive Winkler and James Fuller to the district attorney for criminal charges of forgery and perjury. Bailiff, take Mr. Winkler into custody. You've seen bullies crumble when stood up to. Clive crumbled like a sand castle at high tide. When the bailiff approached with handcuffs, Clive started to cry. Not quiet tears, but loud, ugly sobs that echoed off the courtroom walls. "This is ridiculous," he shouted as the cold metal closed around his wrists. "Don't you know who I am? My father built this town. Contempt of court, that's when you lie to a judge or destroy evidence," Mr. Brennan whispered to Helen as they watched. "In 1954, it got McCarthy. In 1974, it got Nixon's men. In our courtroom, it got Clive Winkler, and unlike his father's money, he couldn't buy his way out." Diana sat frozen in the gallery, mascara rivers on her cheeks. Marcus stood with his hands in his pockets, looking relieved, like someone who'd finally put down a heavy suitcase. As the courtroom began to empty, reporters crowded around Helen, shouting questions. "Ms. Bainey, what will you do with the Winkler fortune? Will you keep the mansion? Are you planning to run the company?" Helen waited for the noise to die down. When she spoke, her voice was soft but carried to every corner of the room. "I'm not keeping it," she said simply. "I'm returning it. To Moses Acanem, who earned half of it. To the workers who built the other half. To everyone Dennis Winkler hurt along the way." She turned to Moses, who stood quietly by the door. "Starting today, the Winkler Foundation becomes the Acanem Winkler Restoration Fund. And the River House will be a home for dock workers injured on the job." A reporter called out, "But you could be rich. Why give it away?" Helen smiled. a real smile that made her look younger, lighter. Because the money was never mine. And because Dennis was right about one thing, clean hands are worth more than full pockets. As she walked down the courthouse steps into the bright afternoon sun, Helen felt free for the first time since that stormy night in Dennis's bathroom. Her shoulders, so used to carrying other people's burdens, stood straight and tall. Helen walked out of court with $30 million and a mission: return what was stolen, repair what was broken. Clive walked out in handcuffs, finally paying a bill he couldn't pass to his father. That evening, as Helen made tea in her small kitchen, Mr. Whiskers purring around her ankles, she noticed the evening news on her little TV. The headline at the bottom of the screen had changed: Saint or Schemer? The maid who might be a hero. The anchor, a young woman with perfect teeth, was saying, sources close to the Winkler case say Helen Bainey may have been the moral compass Dennis Winkler needed in his final days. Workers at the shipping yards are calling her the people's executor. Even some family members seemed to support her mission. The camera cut to Marcus, standing outside the courthouse looking sober and serious. My father knew what he was doing, he said simply. Helen Bainey is exactly what the Winkler fortune needed. Someone who cares more about right than rich. Helen turned off the TV and sat in her mother's rocking chair, watching the sunset paint her simple walls gold. The court case was over, but the real work, the healing work, was just beginning. She sipped her tea from a cup her mother had saved green stamps to buy, back when that meant something. Tomorrow would be busy, but tonight, just for this moment, Helen would rest her clean hands and quiet heart. 6 months later, the river house looked like that Rockwell painting restored. Not to hide in, but to heal in. The peeling paint had been scrubbed away, leaving walls white as fresh snow. Flower beds bloomed where weeds once choked the earth. Windows that had been cloudy with dust now sparkled like diamonds in the morning light. The transformation was as sweet as watching a caterpillar become a butterfly. Above the wide oak door hung a wooden sign, hand-carved by a dock worker with fingers missing from an old accident. The jetty rooms, a place to rest and recover. The letters tilted slightly, imperfect like the people who came there, but beautiful because of it. The April sun was just kissing the river when Helen unlocked the front door at exactly 5:47 a.m. The brass key still felt special in her hand, like holding a piece of history. Inside, the smell wrapped around her like her mother's arms used to. Fresh paint mingling with coffee already percolating in the big kitchen. The rich, earthy scent promised warmth and welcome to dock workers who would soon arrive with aching backs and calloused hands. You know how George Bailey discovered he was rich in friends? Helen discovered something better. She was rich in purpose. Each sunrise brought her not another day of scrubbing someone else's floors, but a chance to scrub away someone else's pain. And my goodness, wasn't that worth more than all the gold in Fort Knox? The old floorboards creaked their morning hello as Helen walked through rooms that once held only dust and regrets. Now they hummed with life waiting to happen. In the kitchen, bread dough rose under clean cotton towels. In the dining room, mismatched plates from church donations waited on tables sturdy enough for elbows and spilled milk. "Morning, Miss Helen," called Joe Martinez from the doorway, his smile bright as a new penny despite the back brace holding him together after a crane accident. "That coffee smells better than heaven on Sunday." "Fresh pot," Helen smiled, pouring him a cup in a ceramic mug thick enough to keep the warmth. "Maria's bringing her cinnamon rolls at 7. The ones that make you think angels are dancing on your tongue." The coffee steam curled up like a question mark, and Joe's grateful sip answered it with a sigh of pure happiness. By the window, where morning light could feed his soul, sat Moses Akanum reading the newspaper. But the miracle wasn't the paper. It was the glasses perched on his nose. Both eyes now clear as creek water, the cataracts removed by the best surgeon money could buy. The first check Helen had written was to restore Moses's sight, because some kinds of blindness can be fixed with money, while others require justice. "They found 3 more families," Moses said, his voice rich as chocolate cake. "Dock workers from Port Angeles. All thrown away when Clive closed the yard to save pennies. Add them to today's list," Helen nodded. "We'll make it right." At 10 o'clock each morning, magic happened. The big glass doors swung open onto the jetty. Yes, that very same one from the old photo, and children poured out like living sunshine. Their laughter bounced across the water, making even the oldest fishermen look up and smile. These weren't rich children with store-bought joy, but workers' kids who knew the value of a good day. They played tag and skipped stones and built castles from driftwood, while parents watched from benches. Some with bandaged hands, others with hearts finally beginning to heal. The river house had been turned inside out and upside down, room by beautiful room. The stiff parlor where Dennis once brooded alone was now a medical clinic where doctors with kind hands volunteered twice weekly. The library still smelled of old leather and paper, but now workers studied for GEDs and trade certifications at the long oak table. The dining room that once heard only the clink of Dennis's solitary fork now bubbled with conversation over meals that stuck to your ribs and warmed your heart. Beef stew thick as forgiveness. Cornbread yellow as hope. Upstairs, 12 bedrooms offered sweet relief for those whose bodies needed mending. Helen had kept things simple. No fancy linens that whispered, "You don't belong here." Just clean cotton sheets dried in the sunshine, smelling like childhood summers and simpler times. One room remained exactly as it was. The small bathroom where Dennis had placed his hands on Helen's shoulders and changed both their lives. The subway tiles still gleamed white. The clawfoot tub still waited for water. And that plastic dollar store orchid still sat on the sink. A reminder that beauty doesn't need to cost a fortune to change your life. Like a museum, Moses had said when he asked why she kept it unchanged. Like a touchstone, Helen corrected him. Some places hold the moment your life turned, and you need to revisit them sometimes to remember why. What surprised everyone, made jaws drop like apples from October trees, was how Helen still dressed. Even with millions dancing in bank accounts with her name, she wore her simple black dress and white apron most days. Her sensible shoes still had soles worn thin from walking miles that mattered. Her hair still rested in the same practical bun she'd worn while scrubbing toilets and polishing silver. "For heaven's sake, Helen," Diana said one afternoon, her manicured hands sorting donated clothes, "buy yourself something pretty. Something that doesn't say MAID when you walk in a room." Helen smoothed her apron with hands that had never forgotten what work felt like. "These clothes fit me here," she said, touching her heart. "And they remind everyone, including me, that worth isn't something you wear. It's something you are." Lord, how the newspapers had changed their tune. The same pages that once screamed, "Gold-digging maid," now carried headlines sweet as maple syrup, "Angel of the Docks," and "The Saint of Shipping Lane." Helen saved each clipping in a scrapbook, not from pride, but to remember promises made to people who'd been invisible too long. The summer morning that changed everything arrived without warning, like the best gifts often do. Helen was arranging fresh flowers in the entry hall, daisies and black-eyed Susans picked from the garden. Nothing fancy but somehow perfect, when the front door opened. A tall man with shoulders broad as barn doors stood silhouetted against the morning light. He stepped inside, a backpack slung across one shoulder, eyes taking in everything at once. "My name is Jonah Ikanem," he said, his voice deep as a well. "I believe you knew my mother, Ava." The crash of Moses's coffee cup hitting the floor sounded like a starting gun at a race nobody knew they'd been running. Uncle and nephew stared across the room, across decades, across a canyon of loss that suddenly had a bridge. "You have her smile," Moses finally said, his voice cracking like ice in warm water. Jonah's smile bloomed then, bright as sunrise, wide as welcome. "People tell me that a lot." It turned out Jonah hadn't vanished but flourished. Raised by a teacher who'd fostered him after his mother died. College-educated, passionate about workers' rights, he'd been fighting the Winkler Shipping Company for years without knowing the blood that connected him to it. "When I saw the newspaper," he told Helen later, "with you standing beside my uncle, I felt like someone had finally turned on the lights in a room that had been dark my whole life." Faster than you could say, family reunion. Jonah became the heartbeat of youth programs at the Jetty Rooms. His voice, warm as fresh bread, taught dock workers to read in evening classes. His hands, strong as his convictions, built a playground where the old boathouse had rotted away. You know how the best revenge is a life well lived? Helen went one better. She helped others live well too. And honey, wasn't that sweeter than any dessert you've ever tasted? The Winkler children found their way back to themselves like lost travelers finally reading the map right side up. Marcus arrived first at an AA meeting in the River House basement, 6 weeks after the trial. Sat in the back corner, silent as a shadow, but he returned, week after week, until one evening he stood up, steady as a lighthouse, and said words that must have burned his tongue. "My name is Marcus, and I've been drowning myself in whiskey to avoid looking in the mirror." Now he led those meetings. His hands, once soft with privilege, grew steady enough to pour coffee for newcomers with shakes so bad they couldn't hold the cup themselves. Diana's redemption bloomed in the clothing room, where designer eyes that once judged others now found the perfect fit to give someone confidence. Her boutique had sold dreams to the wealthy. Now her talents mended dignity for the broken. "I never fixed anything before," she confessed to Helen, needle flashing through a torn jacket. "Never made something better than I found it." "Feels good, doesn't it?" Helen asked. Diana nodded, her smile real as daylight. "Better than any shopping spree." But the moment that would give anyone with a beating heart goosebumps, the peak that made the whole mountain worth climbing, came on a night when rain pounded the windows like it was trying to get in from the cold. Helen was checking doors before heading to her small apartment above the kitchen. The storm howled like a wounded animal, making the old house creak and sigh. Then came a knock, so soft she almost missed it beneath the thunder's rumble. Through rain-streaked glass, she saw a figure on the porch, hunched against the downpour. When she opened the door, there stood Clive Winkler, soaked to the bone, thinner than November trees, eyes hollow as empty rooms. "Miss Bainey," he said, his voice barely louder than the rain dripping from his collar. "I have no right to be here." He didn't. 3 months in jail for forgery had been just the beginning. His fortune had melted away on legal fees and court-ordered payments. The papers said he'd moved to Connecticut, living in a cousin's guest house, learning how small the world becomes when you're not at the center of it anymore. "Come in out of the rain, Mr. Winkler," Helen said simply, stepping back. He stood dripping on the entry rug. This man who once walked the halls of power now looked small as a lost child. "I came to ask." His voice caught like fabric on a nail. "I need work. Any work. I don't expect forgiveness. Don't deserve it. But I need something." Helen studied him. This man who had tried to destroy her with lies, whose hands had forged documents meant to steal what little she had. She saw something she recognized from her own mirror. Loneliness. "There's a place on the loading bay," she said finally. "Heavy boxes. Long hours. No special treatment." "I'll take it," Clive said, grabbing the offer like a drowning man reaches for a rope. "When can I start?" 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. Don't be late." As he turned to go, Helen added, "Your sister and brother are here too, finding their way back." Clive nodded, a muscle jumping in his jaw. "Dad would like that." "Yes," Helen agreed. "I think he would." Restorative justice, not a new idea, old as the Bible itself. You don't just punish the sin, you repair the damage. Dennis couldn't do it himself, so he chose Helen to be his clean hands. And clean they were. Every dollar went where it should have gone 40 years ago. The museum wing called The Cost of Winning opened in September. It displayed everything, the tapes, the ledgers, the forged documents, not to shame the dead but to teach the living. School buses parked outside 3 days a week. Business professors brought future leaders to see what happens when profit matters more than people. "Isn't it strange?" a reporter asked Helen once. "Living in Dennis Winkler's house? Running his company?" "I don't live in his house," Helen corrected her. "I live in the people's house now. And I don't run his company. I help run the people's company." Helen's mornings remained simple as fresh water. Up at 4:30, 1 cup of tea in her mother's chipped cup. A moment of prayer for strength to do right. She still arrived at work at 5:47, though now she walked downstairs instead of catching the number 9 bus. The sun was painting the river gold when Helen guided a young woman into that unchanged bathroom, the one with subway tiles and the dollar store orchid. The woman's arm hung in a sling, broken when a cargo hook snapped on night shift. Her eyes held the wariness of someone who'd learned that help usually came with hooks of its own. "Sign here," Helen said gently, placing papers on the sink. "Then we can get you settled until your arm heals." "Why me?" the woman asked, suspicion tight as a knot in her voice. "Why are you helping me?" Helen placed her hands on the woman's shoulders, exactly as Dennis had done to her that stormy night. The circle felt complete as a wedding ring. "You're wondering why you," Helen said. "Let me take you back to where it all began. Not with money or mansions, but with one person seeing another person's worth. That's what Dennis gave me that night. Not his fortune, but his faith that I'd know what to do with it." The young woman signed with her good hand. Outside the window, Moses tended roses with eyes that could see beauty again. On the jetty, Jonah taught children to read. Their faces turned to him like sunflowers following light. And yes, there was Clive in work clothes stained with honest sweat, loading boxes with something that looked, if you squinted just right, like peace. Helen still carried her mother's purse, still wore shoes with soles thin as patience. The only difference? Now when she walked into a room, everyone saw her. Not because she inherited millions, but because she gave them all away. The grandfather clock from the mansion, the one thing she'd kept, stood in the hallway, its brass pendulum swinging sure as truth. It chimed 5 times, then 6, then 7 notes that hung in the air like a promise. 5:47. Time to begin again. Some say Helen Bainey was a fool to give away $30 million. But those people never saw Moses's face when his sight returned, bright as Christmas morning. Never saw Clive's tears, real as rain, when he earned his first honest paycheck. Never saw workers' children playing tag on a jetty where Dennis once counted coins like a miser in a fairy tale. Money? That wasn't the inheritance at all. The inheritance was the chance to make things right. And that, as Helen's mother used to say while darning socks by lamplight, is worth more than all the tea in China, or all the ships in Dennis Winkler's fleet. The Winkler children, they found what they never knew they needed. Diana's hands, once soft as butter, grew capable as love. Marcus found strength in helping others stand. And Clive? He still sorts donations, still lives simply, still feels the weight of what he did. But sometimes, when the children laugh on the jetty, his smile comes quick as summer lightning, real and clean and healing. Helen never married, never had children of her own. But every morning, 30 voices call her name. Every evening, a place waits at the table. And every day, clean hands do the work that money alone never could. The plastic orchid still sits on the bathroom sink. A little dusty now, a little faded. Helen keeps it there not because it's pretty, but because it reminds her that beauty comes in the strangest packages, and worth isn't always where you expect to find it. Sometimes the smallest things change everything. Sometimes invisible people move mountains. And sometimes, if you're blessed beyond measure, you get to see justice bloom in your lifetime. Not the cold justice of courts and contracts, but the warm justice that feels like coming home after being lost too long. Just like Dennis Winkler promised with his trembling hands on her shoulders that stormy night when everything changed.
If you enjoyed this story, I promise you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more thrilling as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.